Chapter 1. The Hat. Alice Fenton had made the hat in 4 days, which was 2 days faster than she should have, and she had said so on the invoice. The note had been specific. Crown requires an additional 1/4 inch of height. Please allow one further afternoon to correct before the festival. The steward's office had not allowed the afternoon. The hat had been collected on Thursday. The Autumn Court Festival was Saturday. Alice had spent Friday evening in her shop on Farthing Lane, staring at the duplicate hat block and measuring the crown height with a piece of chalk and her thumb, and confirming, for the 4th time, to no one, that the proportions were off. 1/4 inch. In a hat, 1/4 inch was the difference between authority and approximation, between a silhouette that commanded a room and one that merely occupied it. Nobody in the festival hall would notice. Nobody except Alice, and possibly God and one other milliner in the kingdom, old Bernadette Shaw, who was 73 and mostly retired but whose eye for crown height was still murderous at 50 paces. Alice had not expected to attend the festival. She was not court, she was guild, the Farthing Lane chapter of the milliners' trade, which entitled her to a seat at guild meetings and a tariff schedule, and absolutely nothing resembling an invitation to the Autumn Court Festival at Ironvale Keep. But the Countess of Helm had a fascinator with a bent pin, and the Countess's maid had sent for the nearest available milliner, and the nearest available milliner was Alice, whose shop was 3 streets from the Keep, and whose willingness to work on a Saturday evening was motivated less by ambition than by the fact that her alternative plans involved soup and an early night. She fixed the pin. She was leaving. The festival hall was vast. Vaulted stone, iron chandeliers, banners in the Ironvale gray and black. Torchlight threw warm shadows across several hundred wolves in court dress. The noise was substantial. Laughter, music, the particular resonance of a stone hall full of people who were all pretending to enjoy themselves slightly more than they actually were. Alice was halfway across the courtyard, tool case in hand, heading for the side gate and the promise of soup, when she saw him. Cedric Ironvale, Alpha King of the Ironvale territories. On the raised dais at the far end of the hall, in full ceremonial robes, wearing her hat. She stopped walking. It was unmistakable. The deep charcoal felt, the iron-gray grosgrain band, the structured crown with the slight forward pitch that was meant to add height and authority, and which, because the crown was 1/4 inch too short, was adding neither. The hat sat a fraction too low on his head, compressing the silhouette, making the proportions read as careful instead of commanding. The king had not been the commissioned client. The steward's office always said a senior court figure, which could mean a duke or a general or, apparently, the Alpha King himself. Alice had not been told. She would have fought harder for that afternoon if she'd known. She had fought for it not knowing and been denied, which was arguably more insulting. He was receiving compliments. She could see it, courtiers approaching the dais, bowing, gesturing at the hat with a polished appreciation of people who had no idea what they were looking at. One woman touched the brim. A man in military dress said something that made the king incline his head in acknowledgement. They were complimenting the hat. They were complimenting the wrong hat. Every compliment was a tiny, specific injury to Alice's professional pride. And there were a lot of them, and they showed no sign of stopping. "Don't," she told herself. "Don't what?" Sorrel said. Alice's wolf had been drowsy all evening, bored by the fascinator repair, uninterested in the festival, ready for the soup plan. Now Sorrel was awake, very awake. "Don't what? Don't notice that the king is wearing our hat? Don't notice that the crown is too short? Don't notice that he smells, even from this distance, through the smoke and the candle wax and 300 bodies, like cedar and iron, and something underneath that's warm and I need considerably more of. We are leaving. We are absolutely not leaving." "That hat," Alice said. Clara, her friend standing beside her, also trying to leave, said, "What?" "That hat is too short in the crown." She said it to Clara. She said it at the volume appropriate for a conversation between 2 women discussing millinery. The courtyard was not designed for that volume. The stone walls caught her voice and carried it, clearly, cleanly, without distortion, across the open air to the nearest group of courtiers. The silence started there and moved outward like a crack in ice. Alice watched it travel, watched it reach the dais, watched the Alpha King, mid-sentence, mid-conversation, mid-evening, look up. He looked at her. She looked at him. Between them, 40 feet of torchlit stone, several hundred very quiet wolves, and a hat that was too short in the crown. At the king's right shoulder, a younger man, same jaw, lighter eyes, a grin that was expanding to fill his entire face, leaned forward and said something into Cedric's ear. Adrian Ironvale, the king's brother. Alice had made him a riding cap in June. He had been charming and unhelpful and had left without paying until the steward's office settled the invoice 3 weeks later. Adrian descended the dais and crossed the courtyard toward her with the stride of a man who had just received the single greatest gift of his life. "Mistress Fenton," he said, bowing, "I don't believe we've met properly since the riding cap." "You didn't pay for the riding cap." "The steward's office, 3 weeks late." "Regardless." Adrian's grin had achieved structural permanence. "My brother and I had a small wager, a drinking bet, nothing of consequence, and the terms were specific. He was to ask the first woman who insulted his ceremonial suit at the festival to dinner." He paused, savoring it. "You've insulted his suit." "I insulted his hat." "The hat is part of the suit." "The hat is a separate garment. The hat is an accessory. The hat is categorically, definitionally, taxonomically not part of the suit," Adrian said, "under the terms of the wager." Behind Adrian, the crowd was parting. Cedric was descending the dais, and the way he moved, controlled, unhurried, every step placed with the deliberate economy of a large predator who had learned to take up exactly as much space as was necessary, and no more, made Alice notice something she hadn't expected to notice. He was too still between steps. Not the way a careful man was still, the way an animal was still. The particular quality of attention that wolves carried in their human bodies, the weight and focus of something very old and very patient, wearing a formal suit. He stopped in front of her. He was taller than she'd expected. His eyes were warm brown, going dark at the edges, and the hat, her hat, the wrong hat, sat on his head with the confident incorrectness of a man who did not know it was wrong because nobody had ever told him. He bowed, the full court bow, the one that meant, "I am addressing you as an equal." "Mistress Fenton, you have insulted my suit. Under the terms of my bet with my brother, I am obligated to ask you to dinner. Will you come?" "I was talking about the hat." "The hat is part of the suit." "You cannot be serious." "The bet is binding." They looked at each other. Clara had her hand over her mouth. Adrian looked like a man already composing the story he would tell at every dinner for the rest of his life. "Say yes," Sorrel said. "His wolf is right there, under the surface. The stillness. That's not the king. That's the wolf. Patient. Present. We should say yes immediately and investigate that scent at closer range." "Fine," Alice said. "One dinner. Because of the bet. Not because I want to." "Understood," Cedric said. He bowed again. He turned. He walked back to the dais. The hat was still too short in the crown. Alice watched him go, and underneath the irritation and the absurdity, she felt the small, warm pull of Sorrel paying very close attention to something Alice was not yet ready to name. "Cedar," Sorrel said. "Iron. And patience. That's what the warm thing is underneath. Patience." Alice picked up her tool case. She left the festival. The hat stayed on the king's head. The crown stayed short. Everything else was about to change. Chapter 2. The Asking. The first dinner was on Tuesday. Cedric had sent a carriage, which was unnecessary, and had reserved a private room at the Ashdown, which was the kind of restaurant where the napkins were folded into shapes that implied the staff had studied geometry and found it wanting. He was wearing a dark suit, no hat, and he stood when she entered and pulled out her chair, and performed every gesture of formal courtesy with the practiced ease of a man who had been doing this at state functions since he could hold a fork. Alice sat down. She was wearing her good dress, dark green, practical. She had not dressed up. The decision not to dress up had been specific and deliberate and had taken 45 minutes and the firm intervention of Clara, who had come over to watch and had eventually said, "Just wear the green one." And Alice had said, "I was always going to wear the green one." And they had both known this was not true. "You look," he began. "Don't." He recalibrated. She watched it happen, the micro-adjustment, the shift behind his eyes, the king's brain processing an unexpected input and rerouting. The dinner was stiff. He was formal where warmth was needed, and precise where looseness would have helped. He asked about her work and listened carefully and said things like, "I see," and "That's interesting," and meant them, but delivered them in the same measured tone he probably used to acknowledge trade reports from the eastern border. But underneath this stiffness, something else was happening. He asked about crown height. Not "tell me about your job," the specific question, "Why does a quarter-inch matter?" And when she explained, about proportion, about silhouette, about the relationship between the crown of a hat and the face beneath it, about how a properly proportioned hat made the wearer look like themselves, only more so, about how most people never noticed proportion, but everyone felt it, he listened. With the focused, unbroken attention of a man who had been trained to absorb briefings on grain tariffs and territorial disputes, and was now applying the same capacity to something he actually found interesting. His eyes changed. The brown went dark at the center and gold threaded through the edges, and Alice knew what that was. That was the wolf coming forward. That was him being real. The gold, Sorrel reported. When he listens, really listens, the wolf is right there. He doesn't know he's doing it. This is a bet dinner, Alice thought. We are here because of a drinking game. We are here because we told the truth about a hat and his wolf heard us. Those are different things. They talked for 2 hours. The time went somewhere between the discussion of grosgrain weave and the moment she told him his cuffs were a quarter-inch too long, and he looked at his cuffs with the expression of a man who had just been informed that a load-bearing wall in his castle was slightly off plumb. "You have a quarter-inch problem across your entire wardrobe, Your Majesty." "Across my entire wardrobe." "The collar is too high, the cuffs are too long, the buttons are ornamental where they should be functional. You dress like someone who was given very precise instructions by a tailor who was too afraid of you to ask what you actually wanted." "She's auditing us," Cairn observed. Cedric's wolf had been quiet for most of the dinner, watching, cataloging, the sardonic patience of an animal that had decided something and was content to wait for its human to catch up. "I would like it noted that no one has audited us before. I find it refreshing." "My tailor has served the court for 20 years, Cedric said. "Your tailor has served the court. He hasn't served you. Those are different things." Something happened to his face. Not a smile, the muscle memory of one, suppressed before it could form, but present, visible, like a shape pressing against fabric from underneath. The real register, flashing through for a moment. He walked her to the carriage. They stood in the cold. His wolf was close. She could feel the weight of it, the warmth, the cedar and iron scent stronger in the night air. "The bet is fulfilled," she said. "One dinner." "One dinner, as agreed." He paused. "Would you consider a second?" "No." "Because of the bet." "Because it was a bet. You asked because you lost a card game. I came because Clara made me. None of this was chosen." Something shifted underneath his managed expression. Not a crack, a movement, like something rearranging itself to accommodate a new weight. "I understand," he said. "Thank you for the evening, Mistress Fenton. The cuffs are still too long. I'll speak to my tailor." "You should speak to a better tailor." He almost smiled. She saw the almost. She went home in the carriage and told herself the almost didn't matter. The following Tuesday, the bell above her shop door rang at 2:30. He filled the doorframe of Fenton Millinery in a way that made the shop feel like it had been designed for someone who occupied less space, as a fundamental condition of existence. Dark coat, no hat. He looked at the hat blocks on the shelves, the ribbons organized by color, the half-finished riding hat on her workbench. Wide-brimmed, dove gray, the one for Lady Drummond. Mistress Fenton. Your Majesty. I've come to ask if you'd have dinner with me. No, and it's Tuesday. I'm aware it's Tuesday. Is Tuesday going to be a thing? I thought a consistent schedule might be less disruptive to your work. He made a schedule, Sorrel said. He made a schedule for asking us to dinner. This is the most structured courtship attempt in the history of this kingdom, and I find it deeply, personally endearing. Also, his scent is filling the entire shop, and I would like it to remain here permanently. He didn't leave immediately. He looked at the riding hat. What's this one for? Lady Drummond. She rides. The brim needs to be wider for her face shape. Longer face, wider brim. Otherwise, the hat looks like it's perching instead of sitting. Perching. Perching. Like a bird that hasn't decided whether it's staying. You think about faces. I think about the relationship between a face and what sits above it. Most people don't think about it at all, which is why most people wear hats that are perching. He sat on the stool by the window, the fitting stool, the one Alice used for clients. She hadn't offered it. He'd simply sat down, as though the stool and the shop and the Tuesday afternoon were a space he was settling into. They talked for 20 minutes, about brim ratios, about the difference between straw and felt, about the particular challenge of making a hat for someone with prominent ears. You can't fight the ears, Alice said. You have to negotiate with them. And she watched him listen with the same focused attention that had surfaced at dinner, the gold threading through his eyes when the conversation got specific. He tilted his head, just slightly, a quarter-inch movement, barely there, but Alice clocked it. It was the way wolves tilted when they were tracking a scent, the unconscious gesture of an animal following something interesting through the air. He was scenting her. The shop, the felt sizing, the lavender bundles, and underneath all of it, her. He probably didn't know he was doing it. The tilt was too natural, too unself-conscious, too much the wolf and not enough the king. She noticed. She didn't say anything. She went back to the riding hat. Dinner, he said, at the door, putting his coat on. No, it's still a bet. The bet ended after the first dinner. Everything since is mine. Yours. My choice, to ask. She looked at him. He looked at her. The bell was still ringing faintly from when he'd opened the door. Tuesday, he said. Same time. I'll say no again. I expect that. He left. The bell rang behind him. Alice stood in her shop and breathed in the residual scent of cedar and iron and patience. And Sorrel hummed, low, warm, steady. And Alice told her wolf it was just a scent, and her wolf told her it was not just a scent, and the disagreement was quiet and ongoing, and neither of them was entirely wrong. The third Tuesday, he arrived at 2:30. The bell rang. Alice was fitting a velvet band to a winter bonnet, black, precise work that required steady hands and zero distraction. She did not look up. Your Majesty. Mistress Fenton. The answer is no. I haven't asked yet. You're about to. I was going to ask about the velvet first. She looked up. He was leaning against the doorframe, not filling it, leaning. Less formal, less king, the posture of a man who had come to a place he liked and was in no hurry to leave. He's leaning, Sorrel said. The leaning is new. He's never leaned here before. This is significant, and I refuse to pretend otherwise. They talked, for 40 minutes, the longest yet, about velvet, the weight and the grain, and the way it caught light differently depending on the direction of the nap, about her mother, who had taught her to feel the difference between fabric that wanted to be shaped and fabric that wanted to be left alone, and who had died 4 years ago, leaving Alice a shop that half the guild still called Marsh's, no matter how many times Alice corrected them. Do you correct them? Cedric asked. I stopped. Correcting people takes energy. I'd rather spend it on hats. But it's your shop. It's my shop with her name on it. In their heads. It'll be my name eventually, when the work speaks loud enough. She pinned the velvet and examined it. You don't rush proportions. You get them right and let people catch up. He looked at her. The expression on his face was not the managed one. It was the one that had flashed through at dinner and at the second visit. The real register, the layer underneath the formal surface, and it was staying longer each time. He told her about the festival hat, about how his tailor had retired and the steward's office had scrambled for a replacement and had not told him who the replacement was. I didn't know it was yours until Adrian told me, after the courtyard. And I thought it was the best hat I'd ever worn, even with the crown. Especially with the crown. The flaw is what made you notice. You'd have worn a perfect hat without thinking about it. That's true, I would have. The admission cost him something. She could see it, the slight shift in his posture, the way the lean became less calculated and more real. He was telling her that his own standards were insufficient, that his eye for proportion, for the things that mattered, for the quarter inches, was undeveloped, that she saw something he had been missing. They talked about felt suppliers and guild tariff disputes, and the time old Bernadette Shaw had told the Duchess of Alder that her head didn't deserve a hat. Bernadette said it to her face? Bernadette has never said anything to anyone's back in her life. And Alice laughed, and he almost laughed, and the almost was closer than it had been before. He stood up from the stool. He put on his coat. He walked to the door. He stopped. His hand was on the door. The bell was quiet. He turned back. Alice. Not Mistress Fenton. Her name. First time. I know you think this is only because of a silly bet, he said. It isn't. The bet ended 3 weeks ago. I keep coming back because you told me my hat was wrong and you were right. And you told me my cuffs were too long and you were right about that too. And you are the only person in my entire life who looks at something and says what it actually is instead of what I need to hear. He paused. His eyes were gold at the edges. His wolf was right there. Close, present, steady. I like you. The actual you. The one who measures things in quarter inches and doesn't apologize for noticing. I would very much like to take you to dinner. Not because of a bet. Because I want to. The shop was very quiet. The winter bonnet was half finished on the workbench. The light through the window was late afternoon gold. Alice looked at him. She didn't say yes. She didn't say anything. He nodded. Not defeated, not hurt, just honest. And opened the door, and the bell rang, and he left. Alice sat at her workbench for a long time. She picked up the bonnet, put it down. Picked up the chalk, put it down. Picked up a piece of good stock paper, the creamy kind she used for invoices, and wrote one word on it. She folded the paper, addressed it to the castle, gave it to the postboy before she could change her mind. The note arrived at Ironvale Keep on Wednesday morning. It was placed on Cedric's desk by a page who did not know what it said. Cedric opened it alone. One word. Yes. Yes, Cairn repeated. His wolf's voice was low and warm, and for the first time in Cedric's memory, entirely without irony. Filed. Under permanent. Chapter 3. The Dinners. The second dinner was at the Wren and Arrow. Smaller, warmer, wooden tables, candles in jars instead of silver candlesticks. Cedric had chosen it because Alice had said, during the first dinner, that she preferred places where the napkins were flat. He had remembered. He had carried it for 3 weeks. She arrived in a different green, softer, newer, bought the previous afternoon from a dressmaker who had asked what the occasion was and been told none in a tone that communicated everything. He stood. He did not pull out her chair. He'd learned. At a restaurant, she said, you mentioned napkins. That was 3 weeks ago. I remember things. He remembers napkins, Sorel said. He remembered our napkin preference for 3 weeks while being told no every Tuesday. I would like it formally acknowledged that I called this at the festival and have been correct about everything since. The dinner was better. Not perfect. He still reached for the managed register when a silence lasted too long, the way a man reached for a banister when the stairs were unfamiliar, but better. The stiffness cracked in the second glass of wine when Alice told him about old Bernadette Shaw's retirement ceremony, during which Bernadette had delivered a 20-minute speech rating every hat in the room and assigning each one a letter grade. She gave the Lord Mayor a D, Alice said. For his hat? For his head. She said the hat was fine, the head was the problem. He laughed, not the managed laugh, the real one, low and surprised and slightly rough, as though it had come from a room inside him that hadn't been opened in a while. You should do that more often, Alice said. Laugh? Be surprised by yourself. He looked at her. The gold came in. She looked back, and the thing between them, the pull, the warmth, the specific gravity of two wolves who had identified each other across a stone courtyard, settled another degree into place. They talked until the restaurant closed. The third dinner he wore a hat. Not hers, something from his own collection, a dark wool piece with a tall crown and a narrow brim that made his face look like a portrait of a man about to deliver a verdict. Who made that? Alice said, before she'd taken off her coat. I don't know. The steward's office. The crown is 1/8 of an inch too tall. It over-lengthens your face. You look like a magistrate. Is that bad? For a magistrate, no. For a king at dinner, it suggests you're about to sentence the wine. He took off the hat. He set it on the table between them. I was hoping you'd have opinions. About the hat? About everything I wear, apparently. My entire wardrobe seems to require professional intervention. She laughed, the real one, bright and sudden, and his eyes went full gold, not just the edges, the whole iris, warm and amber, the wolf surfacing completely because the sound of her laughing was something it had been waiting for and would not pretend otherwise. She saw it. He knew she saw it. Neither of them looked away. His eyes, Sorrel said, every time she laughs, it's like watching a door open that's been closed for years. It hasn't been years. For him it has. I can smell the difference between someone who laughs often and someone who doesn't. His laughter is stored. He's been saving it. And now it's hers. The fourth dinner, she brought him a hat. She'd made it in the shop over the previous week. Charcoal felt, iron gray band, the proportions calibrated specifically for his face. She'd measured him at the shop during his most recent Tuesday visit, which had involved standing on her fitting stool, the stool that had become his stool during the asking weeks, and reaching up and placing her hands on his jaw. She had needed the measurements, the jaw, the brow, the distance from temple to crown, the circumference, the specific angle at which his hairline met his forehead. Professional measurements, standard procedure. She had done this 10,000 times with 10,000 clients. She had never done it with a client whose wolf she could feel through the contact. Her hands on his face, the chalk against his jawline, the measuring tape across his brow. Her fingers at his temple, feeling the warmth of his skin through the thin callus on her fingertips. He was very still. Not king still, wolf still. The particular, focused immobility of an animal that had identified something important and had decided to hold absolutely, perfectly, dangerously motionless while it happened. She was standing on the stool. He was seated. Their faces were level, close enough that she could see the gold in his eyes. Not the full amber surge of laughter, but a steady, warm thread. The wolf present and paying attention and not even slightly interested in being anywhere else. 8 seconds. She counted them later. 8 seconds where her hands were on his face, and his wolf was right there, and her wolf was right there, and neither of them said anything, because saying anything would have broken whatever was happening in the space between them. She stepped off the stool. She wrote down the measurements. She went back to work. He sat on the stool for another 20 minutes, and they talked about grosgrain weave, and neither of them mentioned the 8 seconds. And both of them were thinking about the 8 seconds exclusively. His jaw, Sorrel said afterward, under our hands, the warmth, the cedar, the patience, the 8 seconds. I will be thinking about the 8 seconds for the rest of my natural life. Now, at the 4th dinner, she lifted the hat from its box and set it on the table. Try it, she said. He put it on. No mirror, just put it on and looked at her and waited. The crown is correct, she said. The proportions are right. It's what the festival hat should have been. I liked the festival hat. The festival hat was wrong. The festival hat led to this dinner. I'd argue that makes it exactly right. She looked at him across the table, this man, this king, in a hat she'd made with her own hands for his specific face. He looked like himself, only more so, which was what a good hat was supposed to do, and which she had never felt as personally as she felt right now. The 5th dinner, she redesigned his collar. She sketched it on a napkin, measurements and all, the precise 1/4-inch reduction in height, the adjusted angle where the fabric met the neck, the line she'd been thinking about since the 1st dinner when she'd told him his collar was too high, and he'd looked at her like she'd identified a structural flaw in his entire identity. Which she had. She slid the napkin across the table. Give this to your tailor. If he argues, tell him a milliner said so. He folded the napkin carefully and put it in his coat pocket with the seriousness of a man filing a state document. The next time she saw him, the collar was lower by 1/4 inch. You changed the collar, she said. You designed the collar. You listened. I always listen. A pause. The real register. Low, private. The voice that wasn't for councils or courts or anyone but her. To you. The 6th dinner she brought sketches. Not one sketch. A folio. She had been working on it for a week, late at night after the shop closed, sitting at her workbench with a candle and a charcoal pencil and the specific, terrifying intimacy of drawing a man's body from memory. Not the body, the clothes. The line of a coat across shoulders she knew the width of. The fall of a trouser leg from a waist she'd estimated by how his belt sat. The collar, the new collar, the one she'd designed on a napkin, but now part of a full suit, proportioned for him, every measurement informed by the 3 Tuesdays and the hat fitting and the 8 seconds and the accumulated knowledge of a craftsman who had been studying her subject with professional focus and personal investment and could no longer pretend the two were separate. She spread the folio on the table between their plates. 3 designs. Full suit, front and profile, with measurements annotated in her small, precise hand. Cedric looked at the sketches. He looked at them for a long time. He picked up the first one, the darkest of the 3, a charcoal wool with iron buttons, and held it at arm's length, the way you held something you wanted to see clearly. You drew these from memory, he said. I drew them from measurements. You don't have my full measurements. You have my head and my collar. I have your head, your collar, your shoulder width from the hat fitting. You were seated, but seated shoulder width maps predictably to standing. Your arm length from the cuff correction, and your general proportions from 6 dinners of sitting across a table that is, as Sorel keeps reminding me, not nearly wide enough. It isn't wide enough, Sorel said. I have been saying this consistently, and I appreciate the citation. Cedric set the sketch down. He looked at her. The managed surface was nowhere. The real register was all there was, the low, warm, slightly undone version of the king that Alice had come to think of as the Tuesday version, except it was no longer just Tuesday. It was showing up at dinners. It was showing up in corridors. It was showing up right now in a restaurant over sketches of a suit. You've been thinking about my wardrobe, he said. Professionally. Professionally. I am a professional. Wardrobes are adjacent to my expertise. Adjacent. Directly adjacent. Hat and suit are a single visual unit. The proportions have to work together. If I fix the hat and the suit is still wrong, the silhouette is still wrong. I'm treating the whole system. She picked up a fork and pointed it at the second sketch. This one needs a different button. The crested ones are ornamental, and they add weight to the chest that your frame doesn't need. Plain iron, functional. It'll make the line cleaner, and you'll look less like you're wearing the suit and more like the suit is wearing you. Is there a difference? The difference is everything. A suit that wears you is armor. A suit you wear is a choice. The sentence landed on the table between them and sat there. Quiet, precise, the kind of observation that could only come from someone who had spent her life thinking about what people wore and why they wore it, and what it meant when the wearing was deliberate versus defensive. Cedric picked up the third sketch. This one was different. Lighter fabric, open collar, no buttons at all at the throat. The most casual thing she'd drawn. The suit a king would wear if he weren't a king. The suit a man would wear to walk through a market town in autumn with someone he liked, if the someone he liked had opinions about his cuffs. This one, he said. That one doesn't have a collar. I know. You'll look like myself? She looked at him. He looked at her. The folio was between them, and the candle was catching the charcoal lines, and the restaurant was quiet, and the waiter was pretending to polish glasses, and Alice felt, very specifically, the weight of the thing they were building, dinner by dinner, Tuesday by Tuesday, quarter inch by quarter inch, settling into something that could bear weight, that could hold. Like yourself, she said, only more so. That, Karen observed, is the first time she has applied her professional assessment of hats to you as a complete human being. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that she just said you, personally, are well proportioned. I recognize this may have been disguised as a comment about a suit. It was not about the suit. The seventh dinner, Cedric wore the third design, not a finished suit, a rough version, assembled overnight by a tailor who had been given Alice's sketches, and very specific instructions from the king that included the phrase, "The milliner's specifications are not suggestions." The fabric was wrong, too heavy for the cut, and the seams were provisional, and the left shoulder sat a fraction low. But the collar was open, and the silhouette was clean, and when Cedric walked into the Wren and Arrow, Alice looked up from her wine and her breath did something she had not authorized. He looked like himself, not the king, not the managed version, not the suit-as-wall version. The man underneath, wearing clothes that had been designed by someone who had looked at him and seen what was actually there and drawn a line around it. The left shoulder is low, she said, because she had to say something, and the alternative was to say the other thing, and she was not ready to say the other thing. I know. The tailor was working from sketches. He needs to fit it properly. I'll fit it. Come to the shop on Tuesday. I always come to the shop on Tuesday. On Tuesday, you sit on the stool and watch me work and ask questions about grosgrain. On this Tuesday, you'll stand still and I'll pin things. I look forward to standing still while you pin things. She almost said something. He almost said something. The almost was closer than it had ever been, so close that the waiter, arriving with bread, actually hesitated in his approach, as though he had walked into a room where something was happening that was not about bread, and was not about dinner, and was about two people who had been orbiting each other for weeks and were running out of reasons to maintain the distance. The waiter set down the bread. Neither of them looked at it. I have something to tell you, Cedric said. If it's about your cuffs, I already know. It's not about my cuffs. If it's about the steward's office, it's not about the steward's office. She waited. He reached across the table, not for the bread, for her hand, slowly, deliberately. His palm open, offered, the gesture that had become their language, the grammar of a man who had learned through 3 weeks of refusal that you don't take, you don't assume, you offer, and you wait, and you trust. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. His eyes were gold at the edges, and his wolf was right there. And the restaurant was warm, and the bread was getting cold, and the waiter had retreated to a respectful distance, and the night outside the windows was dark and cold, and full of the kind of silence that two wolves recognized as the absence of everything except each other. She put her hand in his. His hand closed around hers, warm and dry and calloused and steady, and through the contact she could feel Cairn, not sardonic, not distant, not filing anything, just present. The wolf underneath the king, finally allowed to be exactly where he wanted to be. I wanted to tell you, Cedric said, and his voice was the real register, the low one, the one that had nothing to do with kingdoms or councils, or the careful management of public life. That Tuesday is the best day of my week. It has been since the first time the bell rang, and I didn't want you to have to guess. Alice's hand tightened in his. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her wolf was humming, the steady, warm vibration that had been there since the festival, and her hand was in his hand, and the bread was cold, and neither of them cared. They walked home that night, through the castle town, in the cold, his hand in hers. The streets were quiet. The moon was somewhere behind the clouds. Their breath made small clouds that merged in the space between them. He told her about becoming king at 24, about his father dying in the hunting season, and the crown landing on him before the grief had even started. About the suit he'd built, every button, every pressed cuff, every collar up to his ears, because the wall was the only way he'd known to hold the kingdom, while he learned how to hold it for real. "The suit is the wall," he said. "I know," she said. "I could see it from the courtyard." "You looked at the wall and said it was too short in the crown." "It was. Walls usually are." They walked in silence for a block. His thumb moved across the back of her hand, a small, unconscious gesture, the kind of thing a wolf did when it was content and didn't know it was doing it. "When I wear the third suit," he said, "the one without the collar, the one you designed, I feel like the wall is down. Is that frightening?" "It should be." A pause. "It isn't. Not with you." She stopped walking. He stopped walking. They stood in the cold, dark street with the moon behind clouds and his hand in hers. And she looked up at him. This man, this king, this wolf who had walked into her shop 3 times and been told no, and come back because Tuesday was the day that mattered. And she thought about the 8 seconds, about the chalk marks on his jaw, about the festival hat with its short crown hanging in a castle she'd never been to, but which already, somehow, felt like a place she belonged. She almost kissed him. He could feel it, the lean, the shift in her weight, the small movement toward him that was the mirror of every offer he had made and she had not yet taken. She came close, close enough that he could feel her breath on his jaw, close enough that Karen went absolutely silent. The wolf holding its breath, holding everything, refusing to move in case the movement broke whatever was about to happen. She stepped back. Not a retreat, a decision. The specific decision of a woman who wanted to choose the right moment, not just the nearest one. She squeezed his hand instead. "Not yet," she said. "But soon." "I'll wait," he said. "I know you will." They walked the rest of the way in silence. At her door, he bowed. Not the court bow, a smaller one, private, the one that meant, "I see you." She went inside. He stood on the street and breathed in the cold air and the fading scent of her, and Karen said nothing because nothing needed to be said. "Home," Sorrel said, very quietly, on the other side of the door. "Soon." Chapter 4. The Court. Adrian's idea. "She should come to the winter audience," he said, 3 weeks later, while Cedric was reviewing correspondence. "She's been to the shop, to the Wren and Arrow, to the castle town at night. She hasn't been to court." It made sense. Alice had said, during one of their walks home, that she wanted to understand the rest of him, the parts that weren't Tuesday, the parts that wore the suit. The winter audience was a formal reception. Ambassadors, council members, senior pack officials. The kind of event where Cedric wore the full ceremonial dress and the managed register, and every button was armor. Alice arrived in a dress she'd made herself. Dark green wool, simply cut, beautiful in the way things were beautiful when they'd been made by someone who understood proportions. She wore a hat, her own, slate gray, a small, structured piece that sat on her head perfectly because she had made it for her own face. Cedric saw her enter the hall. She looked like herself, only more so. His wolf made a sound somewhere between recognition and surrender. "Don't stare," Karen said. "I'm not staring. You've been looking at her for 12 seconds without blinking. In this room, that is either a territorial declaration or a marriage proposal. I am not particular about which, but you should probably choose one and commit." He went to her. He took her hand. He introduced her to the ambassador of the Eastern Reach, to the Countess of Helm, whose fascinator had started everything, to council members who were polite and careful and very interested in the woman the king had brought to court. Alice held her own. She had the quiet self-possession of a woman who ran a business and made hats for duchesses and had spent 8 dinners with the Alpha King and was surprised by none of it. She didn't simper. She didn't perform deference. When the ambassador asked about imports, she talked about silk tariffs, with the specific, informed irritation of someone who actually paid those tariffs. And the ambassador, who had expected polite noises and decorative opinions, found himself taking notes. The Countess of Helm recognized her immediately. "The fascinator," she said, touching Alice's arm. "You fixed my pin at the last festival. It's never bent since." Bent pins are usually the setting, not the pin. I replaced the clasp. Your maid didn't mention it because she didn't want to explain how it got bent in the first place. The Countess laughed. I dropped it, on stone, from a balcony. That would do it. A council member, Lord Drummond, whose wife Alice had made the riding hat for, asked what she was working on. She described the winter commission season. He asked about the guild tariff dispute. She told him what was wrong with the current import framework in 4 sentences, and each sentence was more specific and more damning than the last. And by the 3rd sentence, Lord Drummond had stopped looking at her as the king's guest and started looking at her as someone who understood trade policy better than half his committee. Cedric watched from across the room. He watched her talk to Drummond about tariffs and to the Countess about clasps, and to a junior diplomat who asked what she did and received the answer, "I make hats," in a tone that made it sound like the most important profession in the kingdom, which, from her perspective, it was. He watched her and felt something in his chest that was warm and specific and terrifying. Then Lord Halston arrived. Halston was old court, senior enough to have served Cedric's father, established enough to treat every social gathering as a performance he was reviewing. He was not cruel. He was not a villain. He was the specific kind of man who treated everything as a story about power, and who could not conceive of the king's romantic choices as being outside the narrative. He joined a cluster of courtiers near the fire. Cedric was 6 feet away, talking to the steward general about grain shipments. Alice was across the hall. "So this is the hat girl," Halston said, not quietly enough. Not maliciously, conversationally, the tone of a man discussing a novelty. "The one from the drinking bet. I heard the whole courtyard saw it." Lady Marsh near him laughed softly. "She made the hat, apparently, and then criticized it. Quite the introduction. I suppose we should be grateful she didn't insult the throne. He'd have had to propose." Light laughter, the comfortable, well-fed amusement of people who found other people's origins entertaining. Cedric heard it. Every word. His wolf heard it. He should have turned. He should have said something. Not a scene, not a confrontation, just a word. The simple act of saying her name is Alice, and she is here as my guest, and you will address her accordingly. He didn't. The king, the managed version, the one that had been running this body for 8 years, the one that knew you don't make scenes, you don't elevate minor social frictions, you don't give courtiers the satisfaction of knowing they've landed a blow. The king processed Lord Halston's words and filed them under minor. The man underneath the king disagreed. Cairn disagreed. But the king was faster. The king was always faster. 8 years of practice. Alice heard it too. She was across the hall, but she was a wolf, and wolves heard things. She heard hat girl and drinking bet and the laughter, and she looked across the hall and saw Cedric standing 6 feet from the group, his face in perfect managed neutrality. He hadn't said anything. He was standing right there, and he hadn't said a word. She excused herself from the Countess. She walked toward the corridor. She didn't look at Cedric as she passed. He felt her pass, felt the air shift, felt Cairn go rigid with something that was not sardonic, and not patient, and not filed under anything, and looked up and saw her leaving, and the managed surface wavered for the first time all evening. "Excuse me," he said to the steward general, and followed her. She was in the corridor, stone walls, torch sconces, the muffled sound of the reception behind closed doors. She was standing by the window. She was not crying. She was about to be crying, and she was angry about it in advance. He stopped behind her. She heard his footsteps. She always heard his footsteps now, the specific weight of him, the wolf's deliberate tread. "Don't," she said. "Alice?" "I heard them. The hat girl, the drinking bet." She took a breath. "And I heard you not saying anything. You were standing right there, and you filed it. I could see it happen, the way you file everything, under manageable, under minor, under not worth the cost." She turned around. Her eyes were bright, not with anger, with something worse. Clarity. The specific clarity of a woman who had seen something she didn't want to see. "Am I filed, Cedric? Under manageable? Under minor?" "No, Alice, no." Because from where I was standing, the king was in that room, and the man I have been having dinner with was not. A tear. One. She wiped it immediately, furiously, with the back of her hand. Another followed. She hated them. He could see her hating them. The jaw tightening, the lips pressing together, the way she turned partially away as though she could hide tears from a wolf who could smell salt water at 30 paces. "Don't you dare feel sorry for me," she said. "I am a milliner on Farthing Lane, and I have been insulted by better-dressed people than Lord Halston. I am not crying because of what they said. I am crying because you heard it, and you chose the room." Something in Cedric broke. Not the managed surface. Deeper. The thing underneath the king. The thing that had been surfacing on Tuesdays and at dinners, and during the 8 seconds in the shop with her hands on his jaw. It broke open because the sight of her crying was a thing the king could not manage, and the man could not bear. "Please don't cry," he said. His voice cracked. The managed register was gone. Not modulated, not adjusted. Gone. What was left was low and rough and unsteady. "Please, my love, don't cry. My love. First time." The words arrived before the thought, from somewhere underneath the suit, underneath the crown, underneath the 8 years of wall. From the same place the Tuesdays had come from, and the patience, and the walking home in the cold with her hand in his. Alice looked at him. Tears on her face. 3, she thought, possibly 4, she wasn't counting because she was too angry to count. He was standing in the corridor with his fists at his sides and his eyes gold, the full gold, unguarded, the wolf so close to the surface that the air between them was vibrating with it. And he looked like a man who had just discovered that his entire system of managing the world had a flaw, a 1/4-inch flaw, an Alice-shaped flaw, and the system could not accommodate it. "I have only ever had the crown to take care of," he said, "for 8 years, just the crown, the kingdom, the council, the rooms. I know how to hold those. I have spent every day since my father died learning how to hold them without dropping them." He swallowed. His hands were shaking. She could see the tremor, fine and real, the first time she had ever seen the Alpha King's hands shake. "I don't know how to hold you and the crown at the same time. I have never had someone in the room who is more important than the room itself. I heard what Halston said, and I knew it was wrong, and the king and me said, let it pass, it's minor, manage it. And the part of me that is yours, the Tuesday part, the Bell part, the part that sits on your stool and watches you work, and thinks about 8 seconds, that part wanted to cross the room and tell every person in it who you are." He took a breath. The king was faster. The king is always faster. He's had 8 years of practice, and I have had 8 dinners with you. And the 8 dinners are not enough to override the 8 years. Not yet. But they will be. I know which one I can't lose. It's not the room. The corridor was quiet. The reception continued behind the doors. Lord Halston continued being Halston. Alice looked at him. He looked at her. His hands were still shaking. His eyes were gold and wet, and his wolf was right there. Not sardonic, not patient, not filing anything. Just present, exposed. The animal underneath everything laid bare because the woman in front of him was crying, and nothing else mattered. "If you ever file me again," she said. Her voice was steadier than her face. "Under manageable, under minor, under anything other than my name, I won't. I'll make you a hat so catastrophically wrong in the crown that old Bernadette Shaw will grade it from her retirement cottage. She'll give it an F. The first F of her career. She'll come out of retirement specifically to give it an F." He laughed. Broken, half laugh, half breath, the sound of a man who had come very close to losing something and was only now understanding how close. His eyes were gold and wet, and his wolf was right there, and his hand was reaching for hers, not taking, offering the way he always offered now, and she took it. Not forgiveness, not yet. The permission to stay. The permission to stand in this corridor with the cold stone and the closed doors and the distance between them smaller than it had been 5 minutes ago. She leaned into his shoulder. His arm came around her. The suit was impeccable. The wall was cracked. The crack was shaped exactly like her. "The proportions are wrong," Sorrel said very quietly. "Not about the suit, about the world, about the balance between the crown and the woman. About the 1/4 inch between the king who filed things and the man who stood in corridors with wet eyes and shaking hands. They'll get right, Alice thought. I'll get them right. That's what I do." Chapter 5. The Proportions. The next morning, Cedric walked into the council chamber wearing the festival hat. The original. Charcoal felt iron gray band, the crown a 1/4 inch too short. The hat that sat too low. The hat that compressed the silhouette. The hat a milliner had made in 4 days and been denied the time to fix, and then had shouted about in a courtyard full of wolves. The council stared. 12 men and women around a long table, the senior leadership of the Iron Vale territories, and every one of them was looking at the hat. Not at the king, at the hat. At the charcoal felt with the iron gray band and the crown that was, even from a seated vantage point, visibly too short. Adrian, at the far end of the table, registered the hat. His expression moved through 4 stages. Confusion, recognition, understanding, delight, and arrived at a destination that could only be described as the face of a man who had just watched his brother do the most inadvisable and most romantic thing in the history of the Iron Vale court, and who intended to take full, permanent, vocal credit for it. He put his face in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. He was either laughing or crying, and the distinction did not, in this moment, matter. The Steward General cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, the hat was made by Alice Fenton," Cedric said. He did not sit down. He stood at the head of the table in the wrong hat and let the silence do the work. "Milliner, Farthing Lane. The crown is too short by a 1/4 inch. She told me so at the Autumn Festival, in front of 300 people, and she was correct. She was the only person in the courtyard who said what she saw instead of what she thought I wanted to hear." He paused. "That is rarer than any of you would like to admit." Lord Halston, 3 chairs from Adrian, had gone very still. The particular stillness of a man who was reviewing recent social commentary and discovering with growing clarity that several of his observations had been made within earshot of a wolf whose hearing was, it turned out, better than castle acoustics. "She will be attending court functions going forward," Cedric said. "Not as a guest, as mine. And her name is Alice. Not the Hat Girl, not the one from the bet." He looked directly at Halston. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Alice." Lord Drummond, whose wife's riding hat Alice had made, whose committee she had casually dismantled at the winter audience, nodded once. A small nod. The nod of a man who understood that something had just changed, and that the change was correct. Adrian raised his water glass. A silent toast. Nobody else in the room understood it. Cedric understood it. The hat understood it. That was either the most romantic or the most politically inadvisable thing we have ever done, Karen observed. Both. I know. Filed under both, with a star. The dinner that evening was at the Wren and Arrow. Alice was already there, early, which was new. She was at their table. The fact that they had a table, a specific table, in a specific corner, with flat napkins and candles in jars, and the waiter who knew their order, was its own kind of permanence. I heard about the council, she said. News travels. You wore the hat. I wore the hat. The wrong hat. The short crown. The short crown. She looked at him. The candle between them flickered. Why? Because the hat is where this started, and the flaw is the part that matters. He leaned forward. The real register. You made something, and you told the truth about it. That truth brought you into my life. If I fix the hat, I'm saying the truth was a mistake. It wasn't. The quarter-inch is the most important quarter-inch in my kingdom. Alice's eyes were bright again, not tears. She had cried enough in corridors over quarter-inches, but bright in the way of someone hearing something they hadn't known they needed to hear. You're getting better at this, she said. At what? At saying the real thing instead of the managed thing. I have a good teacher. You have a persistent milliner. The persistence goes both directions. She reached across the table. He took her hand. The marking happened on a Tuesday. At the shop. On Farthing Lane. On the stool by the window where he'd sat 3 times while she said no, and where he still sat every Tuesday, because Tuesday was the day the bell rang and the world narrowed to felt and ribbon and the scent of Alice Fenton. She was fitting a hat. Not on a client. On him. A new piece she'd been working on for weeks. Dark wool, the crown exactly right because she had measured him herself with her hands on his jaw and the chalk lines and the 8 seconds that neither of them had ever stopped thinking about. She put the hat on his head, adjusted the angle. Her fingers at his temple, then his brow, then the edge of his jaw. He was still. Wolf still. The patient focus of an animal that had found what it wanted and was not going to move. The proportions are right, she said. Her voice was quiet. Her hands were still on the hat. Yes, he said. She looked at his face under the hat. The face she'd measured and studied and thought about. The face that had walked into her shop and been told no and had come back. The face that had cracked open in a corridor and said, "My love," and meant it from somewhere underneath everything. She kissed him. She pulled him forward by the brim, his hat, her hat, the one she'd made for his specific face, and kissed him. His hands came to her waist, careful and deliberate, the hands of a man who had learned that you offer and you wait. She pulled him closer. The stool creaked. The hat tipped. Neither of them cared about the hat. The marking was hers first, her choice, her action, her teeth at his shoulder where the collar sat, where the wall was, where 8 years of armor met the skin underneath. She bit down and the bond formed, not an ending but a beginning, warm and specific and permanent, the way a well-made hat was permanent. He marked her back, at her jaw, the place where the chalk had been, the first time she'd measured him. The professional line she'd drawn across his face that had become, without either of them planning it, the line between the king and the man. Home, Karen said. Home, Sorrel agreed. I told you, from the festival. Cedar and iron and patience. That's home. That's always been home. The hat fell off during the kiss. It rolled under the workbench. Alice would find it later and check the crown and confirm that it was, despite everything, still exactly right. They have been bonded for 1 year. The original hat hangs in their chambers at the castle. Charcoal felt, iron gray band, crown a 1/4 inch too short. It is displayed in a glass case that Alice considers excessive, and Cedric considers exactly proportionate, and Adrian considers the single greatest monument to his own genius in the history of the Iron Vale territories. Adrian attends every family dinner. He claims credit at every one. His toast, rehearsed, increasingly elaborate, detailed, begins with, "I made the bet," and ends with, "You're welcome," and passes through several minutes of narration that includes, depending on Adrian's wine intake, dramatic reenactments. "You lost a drinking game," Alice says. "Cedric lost the card game. I insulted a hat. None of this was strategy." "It was entirely strategy." "Your strategy was to get drunk. And look what happened. You still haven't paid for the riding cap." The steward's office. 3 weeks late. Cedric wears the original hat on anniversaries. He wears it to the Autumn Court Festival, the same hall, the same courtyard, with the deliberate dignity of a man who knows it is wrong and has decided the wrongness is the point. Lord Halston does not comment on the hat. Lord Halston does not comment on very much anymore. At least, not within earshot of the king, whose hearing, as Halston has belatedly discovered, is considerably better than the acoustics of a stone courtyard might suggest. Alice watches Cedric wear the hat, watches the proportions, the crown too low, the silhouette compressed, the quarter-inch she could fix in an afternoon but never will because the flaw is the bell, and the bell is the beginning. Cedric catches her watching. His eyes go gold. He adjusts the hat. The fit hasn't changed, the adjustment is unnecessary, the gesture is everything. And says, quietly, just for her, "The crown is too short." "I know," she says. "I like it that way." He reaches for her hand under the table. She takes it, warm, steady, calloused. Exactly right. She takes it the way she takes everything from him now, without hesitation, without defense, without the quarter-inch distance she kept for 25 years before a king walked into her shop on a Tuesday and didn't leave. "The bet," Cedric says to Adrian, "was the best thing you ever did to me." "I know," Adrian says. "I've been saying that for a year." "You have. You can stop now." "I will never stop." He won't. Alice knows this. She leans into Cedric's shoulder. His arm comes around her. The suit is new. She redesigned every piece, the collar and the cuffs and the buttons. It fits him the way a hat fits the right face. Like himself, only more so. The proportions are correct, Sorrel says. "I know," Alice thinks. "I made them that way." The hat stays on the wall. The crown stays short. The bell still rings on Tuesdays. Everything is exactly right.